one of the very common mistakes is to accidentally think that you've knit a stitch, but you don't. And that's called slipping a stitch. You may not even notice it, but the way to recognize it is that when you knit the next stitch, if you look at the back side, the slip stitch has yarn trailing behind it. And the knitted stitches don't, they have the little bumps. So that's how you can recognize a slip stitch. So in your swatch, if you're coming along on the back side, the wrong side, and you see that, you'll realize that you didn't actually knit that stitch. And I'll show you how to fix that in just a second. Now, our pattern actually uses slip stitches as part of the motif. And slip stitches are a wonderful way to create very easy patterns in knitting. And in our hat pattern, they'll create a kind of raised stripe of stitches. The slip stitch is a little bit longer than a knit stitch because it's trailing over 2 rows instead of just one. So it elongates the stitch. Another common mistake is to drop a stitch. And if you drop a stitch while you're knitting, you may see it undo itself. And if you notice that you've done that, you want to pick that stitch back up, put it on the needle so the right hand of that stitch is facing you. Put it on the tip of your needle. And take your right needle and take the stitch that's from the row below and pull it over. And there, you've just reknit that stitch. Might look a little loose at first, but it'll all even out. Now, if you are knitting your hat and not just a swatch, and you happen to notice that several rows back, you made a mistake that you just can't live with, like this big hole. That was an accidental extra piece of yarn over the needles, creating that gap. This is what you want to avoid. So any experienced knitter has had to do this before, and you're just going to have to take it off the needles. You're going to have to take it off your needles, and you're going to unravel it, which in knitting we call frogging, like the noise a frog makes. Rip it, rip it. And so you just slowly want to unravel those. The yarn that we chose here is a little sticky, which is actually a good thing when you're unraveling because you don't want it to be too slippery and you lose stitches. So just nice and slow. Now, because this yarn is a litlittle sticky, a little Velcro-y at times, like it might get caught on itself. You just want to gently pull it apart like Velcro. Just really nicely go. And it's kind of fun to rip out work. It's easier than knitting. And just keep going until you notice that you've erased your mistake. There I can see where that extra yarn was creating the hole, so I've got to go back one more row, get rid of that altogether. Now right there I know that I got rid of my hole. So I could go ahead and put it back on needles. I could go ahead and put those on the right needle and those on the left needle. And for circular knitting it wouldn't matter because they're all one needle. But I think I'll just show you, well, I'll just go all the way back and show you how to put them on. There's a right way and a right way to load these stitches back onto your needle. we say this is the front leg of my knit stitch, and this is the back leg of my knit stitch. So you could put on like that with the front leg facing you, or you could put it on like that, and that's actually twisted. We say this is the front leg of my knit stitch, and this is the back leg of my knit stitch. With the front leg facing you, or you could put it on like that, and that's actually twisted. So and I'll show you how to fix that. So I'm going to leave that one twisted. I'm going to put a few on these randomly. And then I'm going to show you these I'm putting all on correctly. So that leg facing back leg. It's actually a little harder to get them on the needle correctly, but it's easier to knit them when they're on there correctly. Now let's say one falls apart. That's actually pretty easy to fix. Just go ahead and grab it with the extra needle or just your hands, and don't worry about that right now. I'll show you how to fix it. Okay, so that stitch feels like it's already been knit. So just gonna start knitting along. And if they feel normal, then they're probably normal. But you want to check and make sure they look normal. So these I all loaded on there correctly. And I can look at the back and see where I have that mistake that I want to fix. So be looking out for those kinds of things. If you know that you made them, you could put a marker there. So to fix this, where you dropped the stitch in the row before, put it on the tip of your needle. And take your right needle and take the stitch that's from the row below and pull it over. And there, you've just reknit that stitch. Might look a little loose at first, but it'll all even out. Oh, look, there's one that's on there wrong. Now, if I knit it the normal way, it's hard. It doesn't feel right. And I'm gonna see that that stitch is on there twisted. So if you come to a stitch that's not on there right, you can take it off and turn it, or you can just stick your needle through the back instead of sticking your needle through the front like you normally do. So whichever thing, if you notice a stitch that doesn't feel right, it's not on there right, you can turn it and knit it the right way, or you can just stick your needle through that back side. And you'll want to find the end where you bound off, which is the end that has the ribbing on it if you followed our swatch pattern. And you'll remember that there is a loop at the end that you drew the yarn through. You just want to try to wiggle that back loose and take that yarn out of the loop. Now, you should just be able to start pulling this apart. It's pretty fun actually, unraveling yarn. Now this yarn is clinging to itself a little bit, and we like that for learning how to knit because it makes it easy not to lose things. But it may at some points cause it to be a little difficult to rip out your swatch. So I'll show you as I go when I run into those bits. Oops, I had another piece of yarn in there. So right there, it's catching on itself. You just want to take it apart. And right there, it's catching on itself. You just want to unvelcro it. There are several ways to join yarn, but I'm going to show you my favorite one. I hold the yarn in my fingers over my index, under my middle, and over my ring finger. And the ball of yarn would be coming off of my ring finger, but I don't have a ball anymore, so it's going to be my cut end here. And then I want to join the yarn holding it the opposite way. So the cut end is going to be on my index finger, and the yarn from my swatch is going to come off of my ring finger. So that's how I would hold them. Now you don't have to hold them like that. You could just hold them like this. The big thing while you're learning is just to figure out what works. So you could just hold them like this and knit. Whatever is what you've been doing is comfortable, keep doing that. So I'm just gonna wrap both of those yarns and knit them both into my stitch. So there's 2 yarns in that one stitch now. My next one, and my next one. I knit 3 like that. And then I'm done with my old yarn, so I want to let it go. And I would keep knitting in my new yarn.